Most folks in the high desert towns whispered stories they barely understood, but one tale carried more weight than the wind that swept through the empty plains. It was the story of a young girl traded away on a cold winter night when her father's bad habits and a bottle of cheap whiskey mattered more to him than the child who carried his name. People remembered how the lantern light flickered against the cracked walls of that old cabin, as they heard her cry out once before she was taken by a passing wagon. After that night the cabin grew quiet, her father disappeared into the saloons, and the land forgot the little girl's footsteps. Years passed, men died, new families settled, and still the memory of that trade lingered like a thorn no one wanted to touch. But no one expected her to return, grown, hardened, and carrying a fire in her eyes bright enough to shame the sun over the frontier, the morning she rode back into the valley. Even the cattle paused, lifting their heads from the frost-touched grass. Her horse was lean but strong, its coat dusted with red earth from long miles behind her. She sat tall in the saddle, her back straight, her jaw set with the kind of grit only long roads and bruised memories could shape. Folks had seen plenty of travelers come through, but something about this woman made them pull away from their doors and look twice. She had the kind of quiet strength that made men lower their voices and women tilt their heads, trying to place where they had seen her before. But not one of them recognized the child she once was. The one traded away like nothing more than a worn-out boot. Her name was Raina now. Not the name she once carried, not the name her father spoke when he barked at her to fetch wood or water. She chose a new one the day she broke free from the life she had been thrown into. Raina carried scars folks couldn't see, scars from men who never learned the meaning of mercy and from nights spent curled up under the stars praying for a way out. Life had changed her. Pain had molded her, but it hadn't broken her. She came back with a purpose as sharp as a hunting knife, and though she kept quiet, anyone with sense could tell she was here to settle something old. The town itself felt smaller than she remembered. The wooden boardwalks, the leaning shops, the saloon doors swinging with their tired creak all seemed frozen in the same dusty time she had left behind. The smell of old pine and smoke clung to the air. A pair of cowhands leaned on a hitching post as she passed by, their whispers drifting behind her. One stepped back as her gaze brushed over him, as if the force in her eyes reached right through his chest. She didn't stop, didn't speak, didn't glance twice. She kept her path steady straight down the center of town where the morning sun stretched her shadow long across the road, inside her chest, her heart beat slow but heavy. She wasn't afraid. Fear had burned out of her years ago. But something else stirred in her, something that came from deep down where old wounds lived. She had promised herself she would come back only when she was strong enough to face every shadow of her past. Now she stood in the very place where her life had been stolen without a fight, ready to reclaim whatever pieces of herself still lingered in the dust. There was one man she wanted to see more than any other, the man responsible for everything that had come after. The one who turned his back on blood and chose poison in a glass instead. Her father, Holtriker, a name she had rehearsed in her mind so many nights that it felt like a stone rolled smooth from the handling. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. Folks said he wandered from town to town working odd jobs, drinking more than he earned, sleeping in barns when the weather turned rough. But no one had seen him in months. Raina didn't care if she had to search every cabin from the river basin to the ridgeline. She wasn't leaving without facing him. As she tied her horse outside the old trading post, a tall rancher stepped onto the porch, his hat pulled low over his brow. He paused when he saw her, studying her face the way a man studies a wild horse, not with fear but with careful respect. His name was Colt Avery, known for keeping to himself and for handling trouble before it grew too big. Raina didn't know him, but something about the quiet strength in his stance told her he was not a man easily swayed by gossip. "You look like you've been riding hard for days," Colt said, his voice steady, carrying the rumble of open plains. "I have," Raina replied, brushing dust from her gloves. "You looking for someone?" he asked, watching her closely. "Or trying to leave something behind?" "Both," she said without hesitation. Colt didn't press her, but his eyes held a question that hung between them. He sensed something in her, the same way a seasoned rancher senses a storm long before the clouds gather. Reyna wasn't sure why she didn't turn away from him. Maybe it was the way he stood firm without stepping into her path. Maybe it was the way he didn't judge her silence. "You might hear things about this town," he said, pulling a small sack of feed over his shoulder. "Some good, some bad. Folks forget, but this land remembers everything." "That's why I'm here," Reyna answered. Her voice carried a weight Colt recognized. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper. "Whatever you're chasing," Colt said, "you best know it might chase back." Reyna met his gaze, a hint of fire flickering in her eyes. "It already has?" Colt narrowed his gaze slightly, as if trying to understand the storm that lived behind her calm expression. Then he nodded once, a slow and steady gesture that showed he understood enough not to interfere. "You need a place to stay," he said. "The boarding house is full, but there's a spare bunk at my ranch if you don't mind simple living." "I didn't come here for comfort," she replied. "But I won't turn down a roof." Colt motioned to his wagon. "I'll take you once I finish here." Reyna nodded and stepped back onto the road. Townsfolk watched her openly now, whispering among themselves, wondering what business a stranger like her had here. She kept moving, letting their murmurs fade behind her. Her steps took her past the saloon, past the sheriff's office, and then toward the old cabin at the edge of town. The closer she got, the tighter something pulled in her chest. She stopped at the gate, staring at the sagging porch and the broken window she remembered too well. The door hung crooked as if one good kick would knock it off its hinges. The frame still bore the marks from the night she was taken, scratches she made with her small hands trying to hold on to something familiar. Her breath wavered for the first time since she arrived. Memories rushed forward, cold and sharp, but she forced her jaw steady. She wasn't that child anymore. And she wasn't here to mourn. She stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under her weight. But before she could reach for the door, a voice behind her spoke with quiet certainty. "You shouldn't be here alone." Reyna turned slowly, her eyes narrowing, and standing at the fence line was a man who looked like he had seen ghosts. His face drained of color, his hands trembling ever so slightly. He knew her. She didn't know him. But the fear in his eyes told her one thing. Her return had already stirred something dark in this town, something she wasn't prepared for, something that was waiting for her on the other side of that door. Reyna didn't move at first. The stranger's warning hung in the cold morning air, and for a brief moment she wondered if this man was connected to her father or to the past she had come to confront. The wind pushed a strand of hair across her face as she studied him. He was older than her, maybe mid-40s, with a long coat dusted from the trail and a hat pulled low. His shoulders were broad, but the way he held himself showed unease, as if he had stumbled upon something he wished he hadn't. "Why shouldn't I be here?" Reyna asked. Keeping her voice steady, the man swallowed, glancing toward the cabin as though something inside it carried a weight he didn't want to name. "Because that place isn't empty," he said quietly. "Hasn't been for months." Reyna scanned the broken window and the sagging door again. No smoke from the chimney. No horses tied nearby. No prints in the dirt except her own and the man's. "Looks empty to me." "I didn't say someone was living in it," he replied. "I said it isn't empty." She frowned. "Say what you mean." He shifted, lowering his voice. "There have been folks hearing sounds in there at night. Footsteps. Doors shutting. Some say they've seen shadows moving inside. Men who went close came back shaken like they'd seen something they shouldn't." Reyna didn't flinch. "Ghost stories don't scare me." "I ain't talking about ghosts," the man said. "I'm talking about signs that someone's been coming here when the sun goes down." "Someone you don't want to run into?" He took a step forward, the boards of the fence creaking under his hand. "Turn around, ride out while you still can." "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not until I face what brought me back." The man opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again. Something in her tone told him he'd waste his breath. He backed away, shaking his head. "You're walking straight into trouble," he muttered. "Trouble that started long before you showed up." Reyna watched him go until he vanished into the dust down the path, leaving a strange heaviness behind. She turned back to the cabin, letting her fingers brush the cracked wood of the porch railing. Memories she didn't want rose like smoke, drifting through the years she tried to forget. She remembered the smell of her father's whiskey, the shouting, the desperation in his eyes as he staggered near the door with a bottle in one hand and her wrist locked in the other. She remembered the cold sting of that winter wind when the wagon took her away. Not once did he stop it. Not once did he call out her name. Raina steadied her breath and placed her hand on the cabin door. It groaned beneath her touch. Inside, silence waited like a held breath. She pushed the door open and stepped in. Dust floated in the beams of weak sunlight. The room was small, bare, and stripped of anything worth keeping. The old stove was rusted, the table covered in scratches, the floor scattered with leaves and dirt blown in from the cracks. Her eyes moved across the empty space until she saw it, a footprint fresh dyed, but clear enough that even the dust hadn't settled over it. Someone had been here recently. Raina crouched, tracing the outline with her fingertips. It wasn't a child's print. It was too large for that. And the stride was long. A grown man. Someone strong. Someone who didn't care if the floor creaked under his weight. She stood slowly, her muscles tensing with each heartbeat. Whoever left that print wasn't far. Her mind drifted back to the stranger's warning. Trouble that started long before she arrived. Trouble waiting for her return. Trouble that might know her name even if she didn't know his. She walked deeper into the cabin, past the crooked table toward the back where her tiny bed once sat. The frame was gone, the wall chipped, but something shimmered faintly in the dust. She knelt again, brushing away the dirt. A small metal hair clip, one she had worn as a child, shaped like a tiny silver feather. She hadn't seen it since the night she was taken. She held it in her palm, her throat tightening. Whoever had been in this cabin had found it, and they had left it in the open where she would see it. It wasn't forgotten. It was placed. A message. A sign that someone knew she was coming, or had been waiting for her all along. The door behind her creaked, but Raina didn't turn. Her hand moved toward her knife beneath her coat, her instinct sharp as a hawk circling prey. But when the footsteps stopped behind her and she finally faced the door, it was Colt Avery standing there with that same calm, unreadable expression. "You move quiet," she said. "And you move too far into danger," Colt replied, stepping inside. "I told you the boarding house was full, not that the whole town was safe." His eyes fell on the footprint, then the hair clip in her palm. His jaw tightened. "Someone's been here." "I know," Raina said quietly. Colt didn't ask how she knew. He saw it too. The dust. The shifted boards. The faint smell of tobacco lingering in the air, though no pipe lay in sight. "Whoever was here," Colt said, "they're not afraid of being caught." "Maybe they wanted to be seen," Raina said. She stood and placed the clip into her coat pocket. "I need to know if my father used this cabin before he disappeared." Colt watched her carefully. Holt Riker didn't disappear on accident. And he didn't have this cabin long. Sold it to a drifter last year. Signed it over in town. Raina stiffened. "A drifter. You know his name." "Most folks remembered him because he didn't talk much," Colt said. "Tall man. Scar across his cheek. Wore a dark coat even in heat. Went by the name Brandt." The name struck her like a hammer. Not because she knew it, but because something about it felt wrong, like a nail-driven, crooked. Colt continued. He stayed around for a while, doing odd work near the river. Some nights he slept here, some nights in the hills. Then he vanished one day. But the cabin didn't stay empty for long. Raina narrowed her gaze. "Meaning someone else moved in?" "No," Colt said. "Meaning someone kept coming back even when no one lived here." Raina felt the cabin closing in around her. "Do you think Brandt was looking for my father?" Colt hesitated. "If he was, he didn't find him here." Raina stepped past him and out onto the porch. The town looked softer in the distance, but her past felt sharper than ever. She took one long breath and scanned the road. Something wasn't right. Someone had left that footprint to be found. Someone wanted her to know they were still close. Colt followed her, leaning against the porch post. "You're thinking about leaving again?" "I'm thinking about finding answers," she said. "If Brant owned this cabin, I need to know why he kept coming back." Colt frowned. "You think your father is mixed up with this man?" "I think my father's choices ruined more than my childhood," she replied. "I think whatever happened to him didn't start with whiskey." Colt's gaze stayed steady on her. "You should come back with me. Stay at my ranch until you figure your next move." "I can handle myself?" "I don't doubt that," Colt said. "But handling yourself doesn't mean walking blind into whatever's waiting here." Raina tightened her jaw. "I'm not afraid." "I can see that," Colt answered. "And that scares me more than fear would." His words lingered in her mind. Raina mounted her horse, glancing once more at the cabin that held her past like a clenched fist. The hair clip pressed against her side where she placed it. A reminder of the girl she once was. "Colt," she said, her voice lower. "If you knew something dangerous was coming toward you, would you wait for it or face it head on?" "Depends on what it was," he answered. She looked at him, the fire in her eyes sparking again. "In my case, it's whatever's inside this town." Colt's hand rested on the railing, his expression unreadable. "Then you're not just here to find your father?" Raina didn't answer, because she didn't have to. She turned her horse toward the open plain, but as she rode away, Colt noticed something she didn't, a second footprint. Near the cabin window, one far larger than the first dot and fresh enough that whoever left it was still close, enough to be watching her closer than she. Realized dot close enough that her return had stirred him awake from the shadows he'd been hiding in, and he wasn't planning to stay hidden much longer. Colt did not like the way the air felt the rest of that day. A man who works land as long as he had learns to listen to quiet signs. The way the wind shifts, the way cattle bunch together, the way birds leave a stretch of sky empty. All afternoon, as he drove the wagon back toward his ranch with Raina riding beside him, something about the silence pressed against his back like unseen eyes. Raina rode with her shoulders straight and her gaze fixed on the horizon. She had the look of someone who had spent years teaching herself not to flinch. Each hoofbeat under her horse sounded like a steady drum, carrying her farther into ground that held her past and her future both. Colt stole a glance at her now and then, seeing the way her hand rested near the grip of her knife, not tense but ready. She did not talk much, but when she did, every word counted. "How long you been on your own?" Colt finally asked. "Since I was old enough to outrun the men who thought they owned me," she answered plainly. He did not pry into what that meant. He did not need the pictures that came with it. "And yet you came back here," he said. "To the town that broke you." "This town didn't break me," she said. "One man did. Maybe more than one. I came back to see where the breaking started and who helped him push." They rode in silence again, the ranch land spreading out ahead. Colt's place lay in a broad valley framed by low hills and old cottonwoods along a thin creek. It was not the biggest ranch around, but it was kept neat, with sound fences and careful hands. A couple of ranch hands rode along the far fence line, checking posts. Smoke rose gentle from the chimney of the main house. Life here moved with its own slow rhythm, far from the loud trouble of town. "You run this place alone?" Raina asked, studying the buildings. "Got 2 hired riders," Colt said. "And my younger sister when she comes down from the hills. But most of the weight sits on my shoulders." She nodded once. "You trust the men you ride with." "If I did not, they would not be here," he said. He helped her down from her horse and led her toward the side building. "You can take the bunk in here. It is small, but the roof holds when it rains, and the walls keep out most of the wind." She stepped inside and looked around. It was plain. Bed, small chest, hook on the wall, wash basin near the window. It felt too clean compared to the rough corners of the life she had known. She set her saddlebag on the bed. "You bring me out here to keep me safe," she said, turning back toward him, "or to keep the town safe from me?" "Maybe both," Colt answered calmly. "You carry a storm in your eyes, Raina. Men who carry storms either save places or burn them down." I just want time to see which one you plan to do." She almost smiled, but the weight inside her would not let it reach her lips. "That depends on what I find?" Colt leaned against the doorframe. "Tell me what you know about Holt Riker from after he sold you? Might help more than you think." Raina's jaw tightened at her father's name. "I know he kept drinking. I know he followed work wherever he could while his money leaked into whiskey. I heard once he was seen near a mining camp, then near a rail line, then back near river country. Every story ended the same. Drunk, angry, and mean. That is all." "You heard these stories from who?" Colt asked. "From men who knew the one I belonged to," she said, and her eyes went distant for a heartbeat. "Men talk when they drink. They like to brag about how cheap life is on the frontier. One of them laughed that my father sold me cheaper than a broken mule. I was in the next room, but I heard every word." Colt's hands curled against the frame. "And the one who took you that night, you know where he is now?" "I know where he is not," she replied. "He is not breathing." "That is enough." Colt understood more than she knew from that short answer. "So Holt traded you to a man who met the end he deserved. But Holt kept walking this earth. And sometime last year he signs his cabin over to a drifter with a scar and a dark coat. Brant. That means there is something inside that trade bigger than whiskey. Bigger than one night." Raina nodded slowly. "I think my father owed someone more than money, or promised something he could not deliver. Maybe that drifter came to collect. Maybe the cabin is just where it all crossed." A knock sounded on the bunkhouse doorframe. One of Colt's riders, a wiry man named Gage, stood there with his hat in his hands and dust on his boots. "Boss, sorry to bother," Gage said. His eyes flicked toward Raina, curious but respectful. "Sheriff rode out while you were gone?" "Left word. Said to tell you he wants to see you in town come evening." Something about a stranger at the saloon asking questions about Holt Riker. Raina and Colt exchanged a sharp look. "Stranger?" Colt asked. "What kind?" "Fellow with a scar on his cheek," Gage said. "Wears a dark coat even though the sun is up. Keeps his back to the wall. Folks are already keeping their distance." The room seemed to tighten around them. "Brant," Raina said, her voice low. Colt straightened. Then the trouble did not wait for night. It walked right into the saloon. Raina moved toward the door, but Colt stepped in her path. "You go storming into that saloon and we will have bodies on the floor before the piano player can blink." "I need to hear what the sheriff knows first." "I did not come back to hide behind men with badges," Raina said. "This is not about hiding," Colt answered. "It is about staying alive long enough to finish what you started." Gage cleared his throat. "Sheriff also said the stranger was asking questions about a woman. Said he heard a girl sold off years ago had come back. Name changed, but the story sounded close enough." Sheriff did not confirm anything. Just watched him. Raina felt the hair on the back of her neck stir. "He knows I am here. Or he thinks he knows," Colt said. "Either way, we do this right. Not fast." Raina paced the small room, her boots scraping the floor. Memories clawed at her from every side. The wagon. The cold night. The feeling of being traded like an object. And now a stranger in a saloon asking questions like he had the right to drag her story into his. "What does he want?" she whispered. Colt single quotes S. gaze hardened. "We find out. But we do it on our terms." While Colt saddled up for the ride back to town, Raina washed the trail dust from her face and tied her hair back tighter. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror. The girl who left this land was gone. The woman staring back carried something in her eyes that did not shake easily. She touched the pocket where the small silver feather sat, and drew strength from the cool metal against her fingertips. At the same time. Deeper in town, the sheriff sat behind his desk, turning a coin between his fingers. Sheriff Deke Lawson had seen his share of bad men and broken hearts. He knew the weight of secrets and the cost of silence. When the stranger walked into his town and ordered whiskey with a scar cutting across his cheek, Deke had watched him the way a man watches a loaded gun left on a table. Brant had asked his questions in a quiet voice. About Holt Riker, about an old cabin. About a girl traded years ago. The way he shaped his words told Deke that this was not simple curiosity. It was a hunt. Deke had no love for Holtriker. A man who would trade his daughter for drink did not hold much worth in his books. But he also knew this town needed calm more than it needed more ghosts. When Gage left with the message for Colt, Deke sat alone in his office and stared at the map on the wall, tracing the roads and river lines with his eyes. He had been there the night the trade happened. Not inside the cabin, but close enough to hear shouting carried on the wind. By the time he reached the place, the wagon was already a dark shape moving across the ridge. He had seen Holt standing in the doorway, bottle in hand, eyes hollow. Deke never forgave himself for being late. That memory had kept him awake more nights than he cared to admit. Now the past had ridden back into his town in the shape of a woman with fire in her eyes and a stranger, with a scar on his cheek. Out at the ranch, Colt swung into the saddle. "You will stay here until I come back," he told Raina. "You know I will not," she said. He studied her for a moment. "Then at least hear this. Let me go in first. Let me talk to Deke. If Brant is waiting for you to show your face, let him wait a little longer. A man who waits starts to show his cracks." Raina weighed his words. "You think I cannot handle him? I think you have already handled enough men like him for one lifetime," Colt said. "Let me carry some of that weight." Her eyes met his, and for the first time since she returned, a small piece of the armor around her cracked. She gave one short nod. "You go first? But if you are not back by sundown, I ride in and I do things my way." "Fair enough," he said. He rode out, leaving her on the porch with the sun dropping lower and the land turning gold. As the light shifted, shadows from the cottonwoods stretched long across the yard. Raina watched the road to town, counting the slow beats of her heart. Listening to the creak of the ranch house and the distant low of cattle. She did not see the figure watching her from the far hill, high above. Near the tree line, a man sat on his horse, blending into the rocks and scrub. A dark coat hung from his shoulders. A faint scar cut across his cheek. He held a spyglass to his eye, studying the ranch and the woman standing outside the bunkhouse. When he lowered the glass, a slow, cold smile touched his lips. "So you did come back," Brant murmured. "Good." He turned his horse, circling wide, using the folds of the land to keep himself hidden. He had no interest in meeting her at the saloon in front of watchful eyes. Trouble of this kind, he believed, should be handled where no one could see. Back in town, Colt tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. Deke looked up, reading the worry in the lines of his face. "You heard," Deke said. "I heard enough," Colt answered. "Brant is here. And he is asking about Holtriker and a girl who should have been protected." Deke let the coin fall still in his hand. "Then we do not have much time. Because if that girl is who I think she is, and she is already back on this land, we are standing right between a past that wants blood and a future that will not bow." Colt's jaw set. "Then we better find out what Brant really wants before he tries to take it." Neither man knew that while they planned in quiet, the scarred rider was already changing his course, not toward town, but toward the ranch, toward the woman who thought she had until sundown, and toward a reckoning that would not wait for anyone's plan. Raina paced the ranch yard long after Colt's horse had vanished down the dusty road toward town. The sun sank lower, painting the sky with streaks of gold and deep amber, but the beauty of the evening did nothing to ease the tension knotting her chest. She tried to keep herself still, but standing still made her thoughts louder, clearer, sharper. Every shadow near the barn looked like someone watching her. Every snap of a branch made her fingers drift toward her knife. She had spent years learning to stay alive by listening to danger long before it stepped into the open. And right now, danger felt close enough to taste. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, snorting and stomping the ground. They sensed something too. Raina stepped toward them, laying her hand on the neck of Colt's gray gelding. The animal's skin twitched beneath her touch, its ears pinned forward. "It is all right," she whispered, though she did not believe it. "You are safe." Her voice was steady, but her heart was not. She walked out of the barn and scanned the hills. The ranch hands had already bedded down at the far side of the property, leaving her alone near the main yard. She tried to shake off the unease, but the land itself felt wrong. Like the night was holding its breath, she thought of her father again. Holt Riker, whose choices had lit every fire she carried inside her. Somewhere out there, the truth waited for her like a wolf in tall grass. And Brunt, the mysterious drifter with the scar, seemed tied to that truth in ways she didn't yet understand. Her fingers pressed against the small silver feather in her pocket, grounding her. That little charm was the one piece of her childhood she still claimed. The man who left the hair clip in the cabin had touched a part of her past she had long buried. She wanted to know why. She wanted answers. She wanted justice, and she wanted them now. A cold gust swept across the yard, lifting the dust into swirling patterns. Raina tightened her coat and turned toward the ranch house. She debated whether to saddle her horse and ride into town after Colt, but she had given him her word. Stay until sundown. After that, she would follow her own path. She had almost convinced herself to wait when she caught movement in the corner of her eye. A figure stood near the far fence line, half hidden behind the cottonwoods. Not moving. Just watching. Raina froze, her pulse quickened, but she did not panic. Instead, she stepped back into the shadow of the barn, letting the edge of the structure hide her from view. She watched the figure through the slats of wood. Tall, lean, dark. Coat. Her breath came slow and tight. Brant. He was closer than she expected. Much closer. Watching her alone on the ranch without Colt or the sheriff anywhere in sight, Raina's jaw clenched. She slipped her knife into her hand with practiced ease, the weight familiar and comforting. She took one slow step forward, silent on the dry ground, then another, working herself toward a better vantage point. But before she could move further, the man near the fence line disappeared among the trees as silently as he had appeared. Gone. Raina stayed still for a moment, waiting, listening for the snap of a twig or the rustle of brush. But the land was strangely quiet again, as if swallowing all signs of the stranger. Her heart pounded harder than she wanted to admit. She turned toward the bunkhouse and pushed inside, shutting the door behind her. She checked the windows, the latch, the shadows cast by the dim evening light. Everything seemed undisturbed, but she knew what she saw. Brunt had been here, watching her. Knowing exactly when Colt was gone, she sat on the edge of the small bed, gripping the knife handle tightly. "Come out now," she whispered to the empty room, though the words were meant for her fear, not for him. "You survived worse than shadows." The sky darkened outside and the last line of sunlight slipped behind the hills. She stood again. She had given Colt until sundown. That time had passed. She grabbed her coat, pulled the knife into its sheath, and stepped outside. The air was colder now. The horses snorted anxiously. A lone wolf howled in the distance. Raina walked toward her horse, ready to saddle up and ride to town. But before she could lift the blanket onto the animal's back, she heard distant hoofbeats rolling across the open land. She paused. One hand on the saddle horn. The hoofbeats grew louder, sharper, approaching from the direction of town. Her heart lifted for a moment, thinking it might be Colt returning. But as the rider drew closer, she noticed the speed was too fast, too frantic. To be him, a ranch hand from the far pasture burst into the yard, his face tight with worry. "Miss Raina," he called breathlessly. Sliding off his horse, "You need to know something." Sheriff sent word. Trouble started earlier than expected. "What kind of trouble?" she asked, stepping toward him. "That man from the saloon," the rider said. "The one with the scar. He is not in town anymore. Sheriff says he rode out in a hurry. Headed this direction." Raina's stomach turned cold. "He is already here." The rider stared at her. "You saw him? I saw enough." The man wiped sweat from his brow. "Colt wants you to stay inside until he rides back. Sheriff is with him." Raina shook her head. "If Brant wanted to meet me quiet, he would do it away from town. And away from lawmen. That means he plans to catch me off guard." The ranch hand hesitated. "Boss said to wait." "Waiting is what gets hunted people killed," Reyna replied. She swung onto her horse, tightened the reins, and looked toward the saddle horn where the moonlight glinted off the leather. Fear tried to claw at her, but she pushed it down. She had lived through worse storms than this. The ranch hand stepped forward. At least wait for Colt. I cannot, she said. If Brant comes for me here, the ranch will catch the fire meant for me. Better I move away from the house. She kicked her heels gently, and her horse moved forward, trotting toward the open plain beyond the cottonwoods. She could feel the land tightening as night took hold. Crickets cried from the brush. The wind grew sharper. She kept one hand near her knife and the other wrapped around the reins. She rode slowly at first, letting her eyes adjust to the deepening dark. The moon rose, casting pale silver across the land. Shadows stretched long. Shapes shifted. Every rise in the hills looked like someone waiting. Then she stopped. A horse stood alone ahead of her, half hidden in the moonlight. Its dark coat glowed faintly, and the rider sitting on it was still as stone. Reyna steadied her breath. Brant. He sat in the center of her path, blocking the only easy way down the valley. She could not make out his face clearly, but she recognized the silhouette of the coat, the way he held his shoulders. The intimidating stillness of a predator waiting for the right moment. Reyna kept her voice firm. You have been looking for me. Brant's horse shifted, lowering its head. The man did not speak at first. When he did, his voice carried low across the quiet land. Some things unfinished should stay unfinished, he said. But you came back. And now here we are. Reyna tightened the reins. You knew my father. Brant let out a slow breath. I knew what he owed, he said. And what he promised. He did not deliver. Someone had to pay. Reyna's heart pounded. He traded me to settle his debts. Brant tilted his head. He traded you because he thought it would buy him time. But time runs out eventually. His words struck her like a blow. Where is Holt Riker now? Brant's silence stretched long enough to make her skin prickle. The dead do not answer questions, he said softly. Reyna felt the world tilt. Dead, her father. Gone before she could face him. Gone before she could ask why. But a deeper fear crept into her chest. Brant was not here to talk about Holt. He was here for her. Before she could think another thought, Brant nudged his horse forward. Not charging. Not threatening. Just closing the distance like a man who knew exactly how this night would unfold. Reyna pulled her horse back, her muscles tensing, her hand gripping her knife, but before anything could happen, thunder exploded from the ridge above. Not real thunder, gunfire. Reyna turned sharply. Colt Avery came riding down the hill at full speed, his rifle raised, his expression carved from fury and fear. Sheriff Deke was behind him, riding hard, shouting for Brant to stop. The moment shattered like glass. Reyna's horse reared. Brant's coat snapped in the wind. Colt yelled her name. The sheriff fired another warning shot, and in the chaos of hoofbeats, gunfire and rising dust, Brant's horse lunged forward, straight. Toward her. Straight into the heart of everything she had come back to. Face. Straight into the edge of the climax waiting to explode. Reyna had only a breath to react as Brant's horse lunged toward her. Dust exploded upward, hooves pounding the earth with a force that rattled her bones. She pulled her horse sharply aside, heart thundering in her ears, and the world spun into a blur of shadows and moonlight. Colt shouted her name again, his voice tearing through the chaos. Sheriff Deke rode hard behind him, trying to cut Brant off before the scarred rider reached her. But Brant pushed forward with a fierce determination that showed he wasn't here to talk or threaten anymore. He wanted to end something that had begun long ago. Reyna steadied her horse and turned, facing Brant head-on. The two riders collided in a storm of sound and motion. Brant swung an arm toward her, grabbing at her reins, but she yanked back with a force that startled him. Her eyes burned with the kind of fire that no fear could dim. She had been sold, abandoned, dragged through years of pain, and yet she still stood. She would not be broken now. Brant lost his hold, and his horse stumbled sideways. In the same instant, Colt rode between them with a precision that only years of ranch life could teach. He forced Brant's horse to swerve, creating a split second of space for Reyna to breathe. Sheriff Deke stopped at the edge of the circle, his rifle raised but not firing. Waiting for the right moment. "Stay back," Colt ordered Reyna. "Never taken his eyes off, Brant." "No," she said, her voice steady. "I finished this." Brant regained control of his horse, glaring at her with a coldness that made her grip tighten on her knife. His scar caught the moonlight, giving his face a twisted edge. "You should have stayed gone," he growled. "You should have never come looking for me." She replied. Brant slid off his horse with deliberate slowness, his boots hitting the ground like a judge stepping forward to deliver a sentence. Reyna dismounted too, her knife still sheathed but ready. Colt started to move between them, but Reyna raised a hand, stopping him. "This is mine," she said softly. Colt hesitated, his jaw tight. But he trusted her enough to step back. Brant paced toward her until they stood only a few steps apart. The land around them held still. Even the wind seemed to pause. "You want answers," Brant said. "You won't like them." "Give them anyway," she said. He stared at her for a long, unbroken moment. "Your father owed a debt deeper than money. He promised something he could not pay. When he tried to run from it, he traded you to buy time. But time ran out and he paid the price." Reyna felt the truth settle inside her like a stone. "You killed him." "He chose his fate," Brant replied. "But you were unfinished business. Loose end. So I came to finish what I should have done years ago." Reyna shook her head slowly. "You think you came to finish me? But you are wrong. I came back to finish the past." Before Brant could move, she stepped forward with a strength she didn't know she still carried. Her voice rose steady and clear. "I lived through every shadow you left behind. I lived through the man my father gave me to. I lived through nights that should have broken me. You don't get to take anything more from me." Brant's eyes narrowed. "You think you can stop me?" "I don't need to stop you," Reyna said. "I need you to see that nothing you did kept me down. You failed. I am here. I stand on my own feet, and I'm not afraid of you." Her words struck deeper than any weapon could. Brant stiffened, the confidence in his stance faltering for the first time. He had expected fear, anger, maybe even surrender. He had not expected calm defiance. Sheriff Deke moved a step forward. "It is over, Brant. You came into this town looking for trouble. You found a woman stronger than anything you brought with you. Walk away." Brant's fingers twitched, hovering near his coat. He glanced between Deke's rifle and Colt's steady stance. Then his gaze landed back on Reyna, and something inside him hardened again. "No loose ends," he said. He reached for his gun. Colt moved before anyone else could. So fast the eye barely caught it, he tackled Brant to the ground just as the gun cleared the holster. The firearm clattered across the dirt. Sheriff Deke rushed in, kicking it out of reach. Brant fought like a man possessed, but years of ranch work had carved Colt's strength into something fierce and unyielding. Reyna stepped forward, heart pounding as Colt wrestled Brant down. Sheriff Deke locked cuffs around Brant's wrists, forcing his arms behind him. The scarred rider finally went still, breathing hard, glaring at Reyna with a final flash of pride that broke into something hollow. "You should have stayed a ghost," he hissed. "I came back to stop being one," she replied. Deke hauled Brant to his feet. "He will see the inside of a cell until the circuit judge comes through," he said. "No one is settling scores on this land again." Reyna exhaled slowly, like she had been holding her breath for years. The tension in her body finally loosened. Colt stepped beside her, dust on his coat, scratches on his hands, but his gaze full of relief. "You all right?" he asked. "I am," she said. "For the first time in a long while." Colt nodded, his voice softer. "You did more than survive. You came back stronger." Reyna looked toward the hills where Brant had watched her earlier. She knew now that fear didn't own her anymore. Her past didn't own her. She had returned not to seek revenge but to claim her life again. Her father's choices had left scars, but she carried herself with a strength that those choices could never take from her. They all rode back toward town behind Sheriff Deke. Brant was tied to the sheriff's saddle, silent and defeated. Colt rode close beside Reyna, watching her carefully. As if making sure she didn't disappear with the night wind, the town gathered outside the saloon when they arrived. Lanterns cast warm light across the faces of men and women who had once looked at Reyna like a stranger passing through. Now they looked at her with something else: respect, understanding, pride. Old Mrs. Alder, who ran the trading post, stepped forward. "Child, you came back carrying storms, but you walked through them stronger than before?" Reyna gave a small smile. "I came back to stand where I once fell." Colt dismounted and handed her the reins of his horse. "You do not have to leave now," he said quietly. "Not unless you want to." The offer hung in the cool night air, gentle but solid. She had never been offered a choice without strings before. It felt strange and freeing. "I don't know where I belong yet," she said honestly. "You start by choosing where you stand," Colt replied. "Doesn't matter where you came from, only where you go now." Reyna looked toward the hills, toward the cabin where her childhood had broken. Then she looked at Colt, at the sheriff, at the quiet town that had watched her return with fire in her eyes. She inhaled deeply, letting the night air fill her lungs. "I think I want to stay a while," she said. Colt nodded with a warmth that reached his steady eyes. "Then the ranch will have a place for you." Reyna walked beside him through the lantern-lit street. The weight she had carried for years lifted with each step. She felt lighter, stronger, whole. She had come back to face a man who tried to finish her story. But instead, she had found a new beginning waiting on the same land that once took everything from her. The frontier was rough, unforgiving, and full of shadows. But she had learned that even the darkest places could hold a sunrise. And as the night settled around them, Reyna knew one thing with certainty: she was no longer the girl who had been traded away. She was the woman who returned with fire in her eyes, and now, at last, she walked her own road toward a future she chose with her own hand.